Let's sew a mini Christmas stocking, perfect for gift cards or small gifts. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are making a mini Christmas stocking as a fun Christmas in July idea. Now for this little stocking, as you can see, it has a fully lined, it is cuffed, there's a little hanger, so it is great for an ornament or for holding little gifts. There is a full Etsy pattern available for this as well to talk about the different types of fabrics you can use that walk step by step, and that link is in the description below. So with that said, let's get started. Now for the stocking, one thing I do want to point out is that it does depend on what type of direction your fabric has. So for these gnomes, you can see that they are all facing one direction. That's important to note. And then for the actual pattern pieces themselves, if you're laying them out just as like a flat pattern, be sure you flip this stocking piece over because you want to be sure that you are getting both angles. The sock itself is not like symmetrical, so you would want two different shapes that you would have those two different sizes. Now for the cuff pattern piece, there's going to be an arrow on it. Be sure that if you have your fabric that has this direction, you flip this upside down so that the gnomes end up looking upside down after you cut them out. And we'll talk more about that later in the video. For the pattern pieces though, in general, you have two for the main stocking. You have that stocking portion and a cuff. I'm going to be using this plaid material for both. This is my lining for my stocking. And then this green I'm going to be using for the exterior of the stocking as well as the hanger. So the third pattern piece that comes with this pattern is this little hanger piece, and again, those will all be listed in the pattern when you download it from Etsy. So now I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first piece I'm going to cut out is this little hanger, so you just need one of these small rectangles. So I just have my fabric, I'm going to pin this on and then cut this out of my fabric as you normally would any pattern piece. It does not matter the direction of your fabric in any way. This pattern can really be very beginner friendly if you are using all fabrics that had no directionality to them. Now for the actual stock itself, I'm going to go through and now just pin this together so this fabric does not have any directionality to it. So I'm just going to be laying these pattern pieces on top and then just cutting them out from the fabric so that I have two pieces of the lining, two pieces of that cuff, and then I have my little hanger portion here. So now for the hanger portion, I'm just going to be folding this in half, hot dog style, and then pinning up that long edge. Once I have it pinned up, I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine and just take a straight stitch all the way down. Now for the straight stitch, I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, being sure to backstitch at the beginning and end for all of my seams here, and then just sew this in place. Once I have it all sewn up, I'm going to turn this little loop right side out. I found it easier to use a safety pin, so I just attached a safety pin to one piece of like this edge. I'm going to close it and then push the safety pin back into that opening, and then I can pull the safety pin out. You could also use a loop turner though. Now I'm just going to press this so it is nice and flat and smooth, and then once it is done, I'm going to set this aside and we'll move on to the next step. So now we're going to come to those two pieces we cut out for our stocking. So I have two pieces of my sock and then I have two pieces for the cuff. So I'm going to be matching these with right sides together, one piece of the cuff with one piece of the stocking. On the pattern pieces there will be little notches so you can match those up so you know which edge to use. And then I'm just going to be pinning these in place and then taking a straight stitch across. So this is what it will look like. One stocking will be pointing to the left and one will be pointing to the right if it's all set up correctly. Now talking about the directionality piece again. These are my fabrics that I have for that directionality. As you can see, the gnomes are upside down with the way it's cut out. That is how you want it to be for that cuff piece. That fabric should look upside down if your fabric has directionality, and then we will be sewing this onto the stock itself. So I'm just going to be flipping this over, doing the exact same thing where I'm flipping it over, sewing it across, and then once we sew it and you fold it over your main stocking, the gnomes will be in the correct direction. So I'm just going to take that straight stitch, and here's what my lining now looks like. So we have everything together, and I'm just going to press the seam open. You can finger press, or you can actually take this to your iron and just press it open so it's nice and flat and smooth. Once you have this done, we're going to be using this as our next pattern piece. So the exterior fabric I'm using for my stocking, I'm just going to be laying this over top and then pinning this in place and just cutting out two pieces from this fabric so that I have the exterior portion of my stocking. So this is just a really easy way so that we didn't have to cut out more pattern pieces. So now that I have that cut out, I should have two pieces for the exterior portion of my stocking. And now that they're here, I can go ahead and begin building this out. So I'm going to keep these with right sides together, and I'm going to pin all the way around the stocking. So just taking my pins, going all the way around, leaving that top open though. So I'm going to take a seam all the way through. The top is going to stay open, the cat side to oversee. And then once you have that, we're going to set this aside. So now taking your lining, remember that we have that seam. So be sure you find wherever that seam is on your lining piece, and now we're going to be getting our hanger. So for that little hanger that we made, first we'll be folding this in half, and then we have those raw edges, and we're going to be lining up those raw edges with the raw edge of our stocking, but we're going to be matching it right at where that seam is. So you can see that I have the little hanger right above that line for the seam. Now I'm going to place the other portion of the lining for the stocking over top with right sides together and just pin this all the way up, very similar to how we did the exterior, being sure that I'm denoting where that little hanger is so I can kind of sew everything together all at once. So I'm just going to go through and take a straight stitch to combine the lining pieces together as well as the exterior. Now when you get down to any place where the fabric sort of changes direction, be sure to pivot your sewing machine needle. And then when you get down to that curve, be sure to just take your time sewing over that curve. I do have a full video on how, like some tips and tricks for sewing curves, and then there is information in the pattern itself. And then you're just going to repeat all of those steps for the exterior of the stocking too. So now I'm just going to go through and just clip the curve. So when you clip the curve, you're taking little triangle notches almost into that curved portion, being sure not to cut into the seam. This just gives your fabric a little bit more space and freedom. And then as you can see, we have multiple little triangles cut throughout here. And then where that change of direction for the fabric came in, I just cut a little notch. And then I'm just going to have this for both the lining as well as the exterior of the stocking. Now I'm going to take the exterior one and I'm going to turn this right side out. So at that opening at the top, just turn this right side out. You could use a pencil or a turning tool if you like. I just use my hands. And once we have it all nice and turned out, I'm going to insert this into the lining of my stocking. So I'm going to open this up, and with right sides together, I'm just going to push this exterior of the stocking into the lining portion. So they're just kind of going in here. And then once you have it all in, I'm going to match up the top portion all the way around and just pin or clip this into place. So being sure to make sure that those seams are matching up for either side. And then I'm going to mark like a 2-inch gap or so. I'm going to denote this using kind of double quilting clips, but starting at 1 and sewing all the way around to that other portion, leaving that gap unsewn. And this will allow us a spot to turn this right side out. So just another visual, see I'm going to go all the way around, but leave that unsewn. Now this portion can be a little difficult just because of how tight of a curve this is, so just be sure to take your time as you go through and leave that little gap unsewn, and then we're just going to turn this right side out through that gap. So very carefully pulling our fabric through, and once we have it through, you're going to see that you're going to have kind of this weird little stocking item, and then you just push the lining back into the exterior of the fabric. And then at the top, I'm just going to pin that gap closed and then adjust any of my fabric as needed all the way around, so I can just take a very nice and neat top stitch. So I'm just going to use my pins to hold all of this in place, and then I'll just take this back over to my sewing machine and just sew all the way around using about 1/8 of an inch top stitch. So here's what my stocking now looks like. It is all done on the top. All we have to do is fold this over, and then when you fold this over to get your cuff, you should see your little hanger. So here is what the stocking looks like. It is so cute, it is so fun. The hanger does appear just as we would expect it to. You have that little cuff, and then all of the stocking itself has come together really, really nicely. You could make a lot of these. They could be very quick, easy little items to have for Christmas. And then of course, if you did do the fabric where you had the directionality, because we did that whole step of having it almost look upside down at one point, the gnomes are going to turn out the correct direction on both the inside lining as well as the exterior of the cuff. This is a really fun pattern. Remember, there is a whole Etsy pattern available for this, and that is in the link in the description. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next.